If you've ever looked at a map of Canada, you might have noticed that all the cities are very close to the US border. In fact, on average, most Canadians live only 100 kilometers from the US border. So why is this? I mean, Canada is, after all, the second largest nation in the world.
Well, let's start by taking a look at this map. This is Canada's population distribution. The darker the color, the more densely populated the area is. What is very obvious is the emptiness of the vast majority of the territory. The whole area known as the Canadian Shield, which is simply the boundaries of the boreal forest, is the largest intact boreal forest in the world. This forest stretches from Newfoundland all the way to northernmost tip of Yukon. It's almost entirely uninhabited by humans. In fact, only about 6% of the Canadian population live in this area. Plus, the northern territories of Yukon, Northwest Territories, and the Nunavut are also barren in terms of human settlement. The largest city in the territories is Whitehorse in the Yukon, having a population of only 34,000 people, and that represents 92% of the Yukon's population. If only there was another gold rush. And the territories make up about 40% of the Canadian territory, with a meager population of only 0.3% of the population. And to put that into perspective, that's smaller than the city of Kelowna in British Columbia. This reality makes Canada the 10th least densely populated nation on Earth, with only 4 people per square kilometer. That's barely beating Mongolia, a nation that is largely nomadic even to this day.
Now this begs the question, why is this land so empty and unused? I mean, a lot of Canada is on the same latitude as European countries like the UK. Well, short answer is climate.
Now, take a look at this graph showing the average temperatures in selected Canadian cities and communities. Windsor, which is the southernmost city in Canada, records an average of 9.5 degrees Celsius yearly and consequently makes it one of the warmest cities in Canada. Now, this is not even close to being hot when compared to other cities around the world located on the similar latitude, such as Marseille in France. They record an average of 18 degrees, which is insane. Now compare that to the average temperature in Iqaluit in Nunavut, -9 degrees. Unbearable. So essentially what we can conclude here is the more north you go, the more the climate will become harsh.
And after a certain latitude, even vegetation has a hard time to grow.
You see, once you pass the boreal forest, the landscape simply becomes an immense tundra of perpetual nothingness known as the Canadian Arctic. Surprisingly, the tundra has even claimed parts of northern Quebec as well as northern Labrador. And this tundra landscape covers 26% of Canada's land, encompassing all of this area. This makes all the Canadian archipelago islands essentially useless. Many areas on these islands have yet to be fully explored and have only been seen through the use of satellites.
Now this landscape creates a large problem.
Economic growth and sustainability are essentially impossible. People can't farm, food is scarce, construction materials are non-existent, and infrastructure is almost impossible to build due to the unstable frozen ground. You see, most of the ground in northern Canada is what is known as permafrost, or permanent frost. This ground is frozen, and when the summer months come around, the ground tends to shift, breaking any infrastructure that was in place. The land is essentially a desert, well, with millions of lakes. Not to mention the fact that the seasons have an enormous difference in sunlight. At the peak of winter, sunlight can last only 4 hours, and the summer, it is the opposite, with the sun only setting by 2 a.m. And if you find yourself in an alert in Nunavut, the summer will literally last 6 months, while the winter will last 6 months. So it makes sense. Why would people even choose to live in these conditions? There is just no incentive other than the scattered mining communities scattered across the Canadian North.
This reality forced Canadian cities to be established in the south, and I mean really in the south.
Take a look at Vancouver, for example. Its metro area is literally on the border. And if we zoom in, we can see that the US border is literally on the other side of this road. Your front door neighbor could literally be the United States. Toronto is also very close to the border, but in its case, the US is on the other side of this lake, Lake Ontario. And Montreal, you guessed it, same thing, barely 50 kilometers from the US border. In fact, If you take the 10 largest metro areas in Canada, you will see that they are all within 100 kilometers from the US border, with the exception of Edmonton and Calgary. Edmonton is actually a big anomaly to this rule, being almost 500 kilometers from the US border. This is largely due to Alberta's plains and generally warmer climate caused by the Rocky Mountains.
Now, interestingly, the city distribution in Canada has another particular quirk.
Unlike most countries like the United States, where a person can travel in all directions, Canada is pretty much confined to an east-west axis. This creates a corridor of population along this axis and is especially prevalent between the cities of Quebec City and Windsor. This segment is actually known as Main Street and encompasses nearly half of the Canadian population at 48%. This corridor really is the center of Canada. I mean, this is where Toronto, Montreal, and the capital of Ottawa is located. So this region really does have a lot of influence on Canadian affairs.
Now, this insane proximity to the US border has really created a unique relationship with this border.
Many Canadians routinely travel to the United States to simply do errands, such as filling up the car with gas and shopping for clothing. And this is considered normal and even smart, as most of the time you will save money. For many communities around Canada, the border is literally 5 minutes away. Let me show you what I mean.
So yeah, as you can see, this is the US-Canada border. This is the border between New Brunswick and Maine. You can also see the other pillars in the far distance. But yeah, you can see there's no fences or anything. There's nothing really stopping anyone from crossing to the other side. Like, it's kind of hard to tell where the next country starts other than these pillars that literally just say Canada on this side. And I'm guessing it says US, yeah, United States on this side. So yeah, technically right now I'm in the United States. Hopefully I don't get arrested or anything.
Now this brings me to an interesting thought. Can Canada hope to develop its largely empty interior and create new cities? Well, with the emerging climate changing, it could be a possibility. As I mentioned before, what is slowing Canada's development in the boreal forest is in fact the climate. And say the climate suddenly becomes warmer and suitable for new vegetation and crops, I don't see why Canada wouldn't have a development boom in its interior. New cities could be established, and this might actually become a prosperous time for Canada. However, it might just be better to avoid climate change altogether and keep the natural untouched wilderness of the Canadian interior. I mean, it's just so beautiful. This land is truly spectacular with millions of kilometers of untouched, unspoiled land. I mean, a lot of animals call this place home, and I'm sure they would not appreciate the presence of destructive humans and their economic activities.
And if humans start doing their thing, well, we all know what happens. But all this is just speculation into the 2050s. Only time will really tell the fate of this beautiful land. Now that is it for today's video. I hope you guys learned something new on Canada's unique population distribution. If you've liked the video, please consider liking it or even subscribing to the channel, and I'll see you next time. Ciao.